Owen, thanks so much indeed for joining us. Was this 0.5% increase expected? Unmute.
Unmute, sorry. So the 0.5% was expected, Peter. And hi to you and hi to the viewers. So 0.5%, I think it was the right thing for the governor to do, given the rate at which inflation continues to spike up, not just in the country, but elsewhere in the world. So we were expecting 0.5%. 0.25% was not going to be a big enough dose to deal with the challenges of inflation at the moment.
All right, so what did he have to weigh up? Because on the one hand, we've got an economy that's not growing as fast as we had hoped. I think in March we were told it could be 2%, but now 1.7%. So that's a concern, and that's something he has to consider. Did the inflation story overtake the worry about the economy?
No, it's a simple metrics, Peter. Yeah. In the country, we have got an inflation targeting policy for a range of 3 to 6%. And I think that what the governor is trying to do is to act fast enough to make sure that it gives the economy enough of medicine to try and fight inflation. Everything else is sincerely secondary in my view, because inflation affects the main industry directly in the pocket. Yes, we need to deal with the metrics, the other side of the metrics, Peter, which talks to growth. But I believe that if there's too much inflation, it's going to cost us a lot more money and a lot more through interest rates for us to try and even finance some of the growth we're trying to achieve, Peter. So I do think that it was the right call to make, push 50 basis points. And truth be told, like the governor said today, we still have room for an accommodative interest rate environment because the repo rate is still below 5%, Peter. And I think there's still enough room for him to continue to take interest rates up without necessarily hurting any growth prospects that the country has.
I never thought I'd live to see the day where the interest rate in the UK is double that of South Africa. Is there any chance that we're going to import some of this inflation from the rest of the world?
Yeah, could you believe it? I mean, if you look at inflation in America, Peter, as well, it's 7.5%. All the economies that are developed at the moment, they're really, it's Murphy's Law, and it's karma coming back around to hurt them because of the way they've just been printing money freely. So interest rates certainly are ticking up aggressively everywhere in the world. The emerging markets are actually faring better than some of the developed economies. So I do think that the world at large is struggling with inflation, Peter. It's a joke. What was a joke was the rate at which these countries printed paper just to deal with their limited growth economies over the past decade. And now the inflation is here, and I am hoping that not just for these developed countries, but for the emerging countries as well, that using interest rates is the right solution for this amount of inflation, because it just seems so high, Peter, from where I'm standing. But it was always going to happen given the rate at which paper was just printed and put into the market.
What does it mean for the consumer? Because we are at really high levels of unemployment. We are struggling to get back onto the horse with the COVID story. And now we've got this 0.5%, which for some people is putting them over the edge.
Yeah, it's quite difficult. You can name quite a lot of indicators that are not going well in the country, unemployment being the easiest one to point out to there. And I think in the next couple of quarters, Peter, I would not be surprised if we see unemployment closing in on, say, 36%, if not 37%, particularly given the backdrop of inflation that is too high and this perception that interest rates are going to make it hard for companies to borrow money. I think that we're in a bad conundrum here. It's problem after problem, Peter. And if you talk about one monstrous problem that we have to deal with at the moment is the high cost of fuel. Some people calling 26 rand per litre for at least diesel. So we have a lot more problems coming. I would hope that the National Treasury and the government and corporate South Africa have got enough ammunition, because ultimately, if they don't, things can get worse way before they can get better. And the man in the streets is going to be disenfranchised even more.
All right, so it's quite likely we'll get another rate hike at the next MPC meeting. How many basis points are you looking at?
Look, Peter, I think the central bank will raise interest rates as long as they need to. If inflation prints above 6%, we're guaranteed to get another interest rate hike. I do think there'll be probably no less than 2 interest rate hikes before the end of the year. We're expecting at least 2. It could be more, depending on how the inflation picture looks, depending on how things are going in Russia and Ukraine. If things get worse, I do believe that the central bank will do what they always do, chase inflation by increasing interest rate until maybe they get to a level where they think it's becoming unreasonable.
All right, Owen, stay there because I want us to chat a little bit about the Black Business Council gathering that's been taking place. And the empowerment of black business dominated discussions at the first day of the annual Black Business Council Summit held at Gallagher Convention Centre in Midrand, just north of Johannesburg. And this year's theme of job creation and growing the economy set the foundation of a robust engagement between politicians from the EFF, the ANC, the DA, IFP and the UDM. Panelists were posted with questions on how to achieve these themes through supporting localization, industrialization of SMMEs that are owned by women and the youth.
A discussion on the current state of the country, political parties coming together to exchange their views. Since the arrival of COVID-19, South Africa has been on a down spiral. Currently, the unemployment rate is at its highest in the country and cost of living not easing the load. Politicians raise their voice around various ideas on solutions to achieving this year's theme of creating jobs, growing the economy through supporting localization, industrialization, SMMEs, black-owned, women-owned and youth-owned businesses. The ANC conceded to the blame and called on South Africans not to lose hope.
Things are not well, and COVID and all the other challenges that were faced globally and locally have exacerbated the socio-economic problems, and we've also seen increasing inequality in our country.
Opining on the discussion, the UDM says the tripartite alliance has failed the country 28 years into democracy.
In fact, the tripartite alliance have failed South Africa. They have dismally failed themselves, especially because they are only there to deploy their cadres to key strategic positions, who are today selling those assets, national assets, without consulting you here.
As discussions continued, the IFP raised concerns about the current environment of businesses, arguing that it was not conducive for black women.
The space is not yet conducive for black women to emerge in business in our country. The responsibility lies on the political parties and the government of the day.
Meanwhile, the EFF questioned the progress of the country under the ANC-led government.
We need to domestically industrialize, build domestically owned industries, not the foolish and rubbish industrial policy that is being pursued by the current government. How do you have industrial policy which is primarily anchored by foreign companies, by companies from America, from China, from South Korea, from all areas?
The Democratic Alliance argued that the solution lied in not pitting South Africans against one another, but formulation and implementation of policies that would work to change the lives of many.
And this will require major policy reforms. And the first one is public debt and debt to GDP. Right now, Government debt, we all know, is in excess of 70% of debt to GDP. That is the ratio. But what does this actually mean? It means that we now are in a situation where the state pays more in interest payments back to lenders than it invests in education.
The two-day event continues until Friday, with President Ramaphosa expected to give the keynote address at an annual Black Tie Gala dinner on Thursday evening. Nhlanhla Khatlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, we continue talking to the CEO of wealth management firm Inkunzi Wealth, Owen Nkomo. Owen, it seems as if we have the same conversations at these gatherings, and it's always about a lack of progress. What do you think is holding back moving black business to where it needs to be?
It's one word: corruption, Peter. It's corruption. Government may put all the money it can to try and facilitate participation of black business, whether it's black women or black men or the youth. But the problem is that the money that's dedicated to making sure that people can get access to that capital and they can start businesses or they can sustain businesses and create jobs, that money, it takes a lot for that money to reach the people that it's actually destined for. And the other challenge that you have, Peter, is the simple fact that the government is the biggest spender in the country from procuring stuff that it needs to run the economy. But it's so sad that the government cannot direct some of those projects to the very people that the government is trying to empower. You know, hundreds of billions of rands are spent on non-black businesses out there because we have not managed to create black businesses that have got enough critical mass to support government demand for whatever material they require. And it's so sad because the government is a customer on the one end and the government is payer on the other end. So one would think it's easy to facilitate making sure that a business that's standing in the middle, supplying the government with paper, supplying the government with fuel, you know, if it was black, it was paid on time. You know, I think that it's lack of commitment by the government to deal with the corrupt elements in the value chain that results in these black businesses not being paid and ultimately not being sustainable, Peter. And obviously, where there's not enough training, where there's not enough expertise for the small businesses to be good partners for the government, there is no way that we can expect miraculously that there will be big enough companies that can deal with the government. And even if there are these big companies that are black, corruption raises its head when people want to take bribes in order for people to get work and ultimately to get paid. I mean, even to get paid an invoice, Peter, these days, you hear people saying we have to part with money. But why do we need to pay fees to people that work for the government, a government that we have supplied with whatever it was asking for? So if we just deal with corruption, I believe you've got a good 2 to 3% locked up in GDP growth for South Africa.
So corruption between the state and the private sector. What about private sector? We hear about supplier development programs all the time. Are they not working? The private sector helping to grow small black business to bigger black businesses?
Look, we see a bit of success in some companies. We see a bit of progress being made, but Peter, it's just not big enough. It's just not enough to sustain and create new black businesses. You know, we should be seeing, you know, the creation of about 100, at least, solid businesses that write 20 million rands in revenue and above from the private sector and from government. But I think I can almost guarantee with a very high degree of certainty that that is not happening. And that is because the private sector as well has its own problems from procuring stuff from black companies. You know, if you have to rely on a scorecard for you to get active and say, yo, we haven't met our targets for procurement from black people, it's the last quarter. Let's start dishing out orders. Let's start dishing out tenders. You cannot create a sustainable future for any company that is black and that is a partner to you. And I think that the government needs to be more consistently pushing the private sector to do the right thing, as well as making sure that government employees themselves who are in the supply chain, who are in procurement on behalf of the government, do the right thing. And I can bet you, Peter, we've got the story of Singapore. The reason Singapore is what it is today is because the government dealt with corruption at the highest level of government. And so filtering down rules that made sure that things are done on the straight and narrow was very easy because people at the top knew they would get punished. And I wish that the government could explore more punitive punishment for employees working in the government. That's actually on the wrong side of us trying to develop and grow more sustainable business, which is the biggest answer to dealing with unemployment and GDP growth in the country.
All right, so corruption, definitely one problem. Let's talk about the black businesses themselves. Are they adequately resourced, adequately equipped with talent to be able to do some of these tasks? Or is there a lot more help required there?
Look, I think every little bit of help is necessary. But I want to argue that there is enough black businesses out there that can eat up some of the demand for so-called black suppliers in the value chain. And I want to argue that some of the companies that are doing this very well are the listed companies because they are monitored on a regular basis in terms of how much black business they've supported. But I do know a lot of people that I'm close to who are in business who are saying it's very hard to get any work as a black business, even if they're well-resourced. I'm talking about guys that have worked for the big companies, listed companies. I'm talking about guys who work for banks, guys who've worked for mining companies, who have then left and started their own businesses. They say the struggle is real, Peter. These are the guys who've been working over the past 30 years, who've got experience in these industries that they're servicing. But remember one thing, as a black person in the country and on the continent in general, you don't have a balance sheet. How are you going to resource your business? How are you going to buy equipment that you require, machinery that you require if you don't have a balance sheet? When you go to the bank, they start asking you, what does your balance sheet look like? And you don't have that. So you then say, okay, let me see where I can go to get support from the government. And unfortunately, you are met with a different type of conversation, which asks you to do things that you don't really want to do, in order to get work. And unfortunately, for that reason, Peter, it's very difficult to find a lot of black businesses that are well capitalized, that have got the right skill set, that can hire LLBs and hire guys with big homes and finance to help them manage their companies and be operationally sound. We see this on a daily basis in our business because we've got a lending business to small companies where we try to help them, get access to this capital. But because the guys haven't had access to the capital and they don't have experience in running companies, they end up, not being an ideal partner for us. So I do wish that the government would be more proactive in making sure that it's easy to get access to capital. And, they do deals with private sector where some of the services such as accounting, legal work, and things like that are made accessible to the black man who's trying to create a sustainable business.
Owen, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much, sir.